Okay, the French Revolution. So what influence do women play here? Well, Olympe de Gouges is an example of a woman who speaks up after the Declaration of the Rights of Men. She writes the Declaration of the Rights of Women, and so she says, "Oh, guess what? Women should be included in these rights." But there's a difference. The Declaration of the Rights of Man is a government document that becomes the basis for the government, for the National Assembly and the governments that follow. The Declaration of the Rights of Women is just a document she writes and publishes, but it's not an official document. It's not implemented. It's not the official ideas of the government. And what's really interesting is that Olympe de Gouges is, in fact, a member of this bourgeois class. This is why she's able to comment and write, is because she's from this better off class. And so she, in fact, will be a victim of the Reign of Terror. She will be killed because she begins to question the more radical measures that begin to take place as the revolution continues, and so she will be executed. Now, the women also play a role in, to some degree, radicalizing the French Revolution. We've got examples of women playing this role in making the revolution more radical. For example, with the Women's March on Versailles, which is the term some historians have given to this, because there is a lot of women marching to Versailles in 1789, and the result, this is after the National Assembly has begun to restrain the power of the king. So after the French Revolution has begun. And these women march on Versailles because they're concerned about the escalating price of bread, and therefore the shortages, the hunger that exists in Paris. And so they hear about how Versailles has plenty of bread, and so they march out, the 15 miles or whatnot from Paris to Versailles, and therefore surround the palace, demand that the king return to Paris and be with the people. And the result of this is, of course, now that the revolution will be moved from Versailles into Paris, the revolution will now be surrounded by these radical urban dwellers in Paris, and therefore, as it goes more, as their demands become more heated because of bread prices, because of anger about continued inequality, they will be able to influence the government, and the revolution will then go in that more radical direction that reflects the interests of these poor Parisians. And remember, most people in France are not urban Parisians or living in cities. Most people in France are peasants who have different class interests. They've got different interests than urban dwellers. They're not part of the working class. Peasants don't want lower bread prices, because peasants make money from selling that grain. So, the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women is an example of one of these radical sans-culottes organizations of women pressuring the National Convention to implement laws that will bring about more equality, that will lower bread prices, that will improve the lives of women and families in Paris and France. That's what they're calling for. In actuality, the things are things like price controls and measures to prevent and measures to redistribute wealth. There's this anger as the revolution continues into 1790 and into 1791, this anger that now there's equality in that there's no more nobles, but there hasn't been a change in who has wealth, right? The poor are still really poor, and so many of these urban women are angry about that. Now, of course, during the National Convention, the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women is actually banned. Right? They outlaw it. And so women's political organizations are ended during the radical phase. Why does this happen? Because many of these radical males that are leading the government are inspired by the ideas of Rousseau. That the role of women is in the house, not in the political sphere, but in the domestic one. And also, many people in the government want to stop these radical women's groups because they're encouraging policies that the government doesn't want to do. Right? So the Society of Radical Republican Women is viewed as, or Revolutionary Republican Women, is viewed as too radical, right? Too extreme in their demands, and too violent in their rhetoric, calling for the terror, calling for, to get rid of these groups and these people that have wealth. And so it's perhaps Rousseau is a convenient excuse to ban them. But it's sort of both this idea of Rousseau's idea about the ideal place for women and the political necessity to end these radical women from trying to disrupt the government that result in it being shut down. Okay, as we go into the 19th century, this is where we really begin to see changes for women. Now, just before the 19th century, what are women doing? The average woman that's not participating in the Enlightenment or the Renaissance, what are people doing? Well, most people are peasants, so therefore, what are women doing? Women are working in the agricultural sector, they're farming, and women are working in the cottage industry. They are making things in their houses, making gloves, making shirts, making sweaters. With the commercial revolution, seeing these merchants that are going around hiring peasants to work, we see women having jobs as spinners that are spinning wool into thread or spinning cotton into thread. We have women having jobs as weavers, weaving that thread into textiles of some sort. Sometimes women are working alongside their husband in the cottage industry, with women as spinners, their husband as weavers, or the husband dyeing the cloth after the woman has weaved it together. So we see women playing a role, sometimes within the family unit, to produce items. So the 19th century then, the Industrial Revolution will have profound effects on the role of women. Now, as your book argued, there were already changes going on with women before this, with the Agricultural Revolution. Women had been involved with agriculture, but with new tools that were heavier. Heavier plows to ground up the soil deeper, heavier picks and other tools. What we saw was women participating in agriculture, and agricultural production was being hurt, their ability to participate. And so more and more women are turning to the domestic system, jobs in the house, cottage industry. And many women are turning to domestic service. For example, they're turning to, working as maids and things like this, which is quite common for young girls before they're married in order to build up their dowry, is to work for a more well-off family, as a maid, as a cook, as a nanny. And of course we see, women participating in prostitution. And this will increase, in fact, when we see urbanization happening, people moving to cities during the Industrial Revolution. We're actually going to see a dramatic increase in the amount of prostitutes in those cities.